They told me to stop talking money at the dinner table. So I opened my laptop and showed them a $14 million portfolio instead. Hi, I'm Leah, the quiet one, the so-called dropout who everyone thought was barely making rent. Until one Thanksgiving dinner changed everything. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just let the numbers speak. You should have seen their faces when they realized I wasn't just doing the camera thing. I owned the mortgage company behind their house. What led up to that moment? Years of silence, one secret mentor, and a locked box that changed my life. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way I can send you a special greeting. Now let's start the story together. I always thought I'd leave quietly, maybe after graduation or after one of those small-town arguments that fizzled out before it got too loud. But when I finally said the word no, it didn't fizzle. It fractured. The kitchen smelled like reheated meatloaf and boiled green beans. Spring hadn't arrived yet in Duluth. Ice still clung to the edges of our windows, and the hardwood beneath my bare feet was cold enough to sting. Jason was already halfway through his plate. Dad sat stiff at the head of the table, reading something on his phone until I cleared my throat. I got in, I said. Chicago School of Visual Arts. Jason paused. Mom didn't look up from her peas. Dad gave me a half laugh. Into what? The photography program. I got a scholarship, half tuition, and I've been saving from the diner job. That's enough. His fork hit the plate like a gavel. You're not throwing your future at cameras. You'll apply to nursing, like Jason. End of story. I felt it in my chest first, like something unbuckling. I already declined the backup schools. I'm going. This is what I've worked for. You're going nowhere, he said. Not on my dime. You want to chase pipe dreams? Fine. Do it from the street. Mom's lips parted, but she said nothing. Her eyes floated somewhere above the dishes, distant and cloudy. Jason looked at his water glass like it had answers. I stood, palms sweaty, legs shaking under me. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just said, okay. That night, I packed in silence. Jeans, sketchbooks, my cheap camera. I'd been collecting little things for months, like I always knew this moment would come. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the hallway light. As I zipped my duffel, I heard footsteps. It was Mom. She didn't hug me, she didn't speak. She just pressed a small velvet pouch into my hand, her fingers trembling like leaves. From Grandma Eloise, she whispered. She said you'd know when it mattered. The Greyhound station was nearly empty. The motel next to it looked like a place people didn't go unless they had nowhere else. I checked in with cash, walked up the sticky stairs, and collapsed onto the thin mattress. Only then did I open the pouch. Inside, a delicate gold locket, smooth and warm in my hand, a folded letter, and a single key with a tag, Box 312. I unfolded the paper. It was her handwriting. The curves were unmistakable. If you're reading this, you've already made the bravest decision. I'm proud of you. I held the letter against my chest and let the silence fill the room. That night, I wasn't running away. I was stepping into something no one else had given me permission to choose. I had exactly $27 in my checking account, just enough for a motel night and maybe a sandwich. But when I walked into that bank the next morning, I was carrying something heavier than money, hope laced with doubt. The air inside Lakeside First Bank was colder than outside. It smelled like paper and metal, that faint scent of things locked away and forgotten. A clerk with a pressed shirt and clipped tone led me down to the vault without asking questions. My hand trembled slightly as I held out the key marked Box 312. The deposit box slid out from its metal row with a gentle clang. I took a breath and lifted the lid. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue and cloth, were a handful of delicate items. Vintage jewelry, mostly. A brooch, shaped like a dragonfly. An ornate ring with tiny green stones. A necklace that looked too detailed to be fake. Beside them, an envelope with my name in Grandma Eloise's handwriting. I opened the letter slowly. Leah, if you've come this far, then you've already stepped into the life I always believed you could have. These pieces are real, and they're not just beautiful. They're proof that you see what others overlook. Take them to Mark Delgado at North Loop Collectibles. He'll know. I didn't know anyone in Minneapolis, much less someone who dealt in antiques. But I found the address on my phone, caught the light rail, and stood outside a narrow brick shop with stained glass in the door and a bell that jingled as I walked in. Mark Delgado looked up from a glass case. He had silver at his temples and wore a jacket that might have cost more than my entire suitcase. "You're Eloise's granddaughter," he said. Not asked, stated. I nodded and handed him the pouch. He didn't speak at first, just unwrapped each item with the slow reverence of someone handling small miracles. His eyebrows lifted with each piece. Finally, he looked at me, really looked. "This isn't costume jewelry," he said. "This is Art Deco, 1930s French, possibly Lalique. Where did she get these?" "She collected," I said. Quietly, I guess. He gave a small, surprised laugh. "Smart woman, these—" "Leah, this collection's worth at least $400,000, maybe more depending on provenance." I couldn't speak. My fingers gripped the edge of the display case. The floor didn't feel steady anymore. Mark watched me for a moment, then added, "You didn't flinch. Most people would be giddy or panicked, but you stayed grounded. You have the eye most trained people don't. I could teach you how to turn this into something real." The offer sat in the air between us like a key waiting to be picked up. I'd never been asked to stay, to learn, to be seen. My voice was barely a whisper. Teach me everything. For years, I let them think I was struggling. Ramen in a chipped bowl, shots of snow-covered bus stops, a blurry photo of an overstuffed laundry basket, little details curated to paint a life barely holding together. I knew what they expected from me, and I gave it to them, one quiet post at a time. My real life, though, was quiet in a different way. From my office on the 32nd floor, the Minneapolis skyline looked like a painting, silver and blue, tinged with the gold of a late November sun. Floor-to-ceiling windows surrounded me. My desk, made of reclaimed walnut, was positioned in the center like an art piece itself. I could see the river cutting through the city, already starting to freeze. Julia walked in with my afternoon tea, just as she always did. She never asked why I didn't do interviews or why my name didn't appear on the press releases for Vaughn and Morgan acquisitions. She just understood. That was one of the many reasons I trusted her. "You've got a message," she said, setting the cup down carefully, "from a Jason Morgan." I didn't answer right away, just stared at the blinking subject line on the screen. Subject: help? I clicked. There were no pleasantries, just lines typed too fast to be edited. "Dad's been laid off. Mom's meds are getting hard to cover. I know things were tense. But if there's anything you can do, even just a little, we'd be grateful." I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Jason. The one who once told me I should just settle down already and stop chasing artsy nonsense. The one who laughed when Dad said I wouldn't last 6 months out there alone. I wasn't angry. That had burned off years ago. What lingered now was something quieter. Like touching an old bruise you forgot you had. I typed back 2 lines. "Dinner, my place, Thanksgiving weekend, bring them both." Julia raised an eyebrow as she read over my shoulder. "That's a bold invitation." "They still think I live above a laundromat," I said. "It's time they saw where I actually live." She sat down across from me. "Why dinner?" I looked out the window where the wind tugged at the edges of the world and the rooftops shimmered with the threat of early snow. "Because people let their guard down over a warm meal," I said. "They think they're safe when the plates are full. That's when the truth slips out." Julia didn't smile. She just nodded slowly like someone turning a page in a heavy book. "Want me to make the call to the caterer?" I shook my head. Number, I'll cook this one. I closed the laptop and walked over to the window. The city stretched below, endless and glittering. The same streets I once wandered with $30 in my pocket now formed the grid beneath my feet. I whispered to the glass, more to myself than anyone else, "Let's set the table." The house was warm when they arrived. I'd made sure of that. I wanted the lights low, the candles flickering with just enough glow to make the silverware shimmer and the jazz drifting from the speakers soft enough to sound accidental. Jason rang the bell 3 minutes early. Of course he did. He always liked arriving just ahead of schedule, like it proved something. Behind him, our mother stood in a beige wool coat she hadn't worn since Jason's wedding. My father came last, looking unimpressed before he'd even stepped through the door. "Wow," Jason said, glancing around. "This place is nice. You rent this whole floor?" "No," I said, offering him a glass of wine. "I live here." They didn't say much after that, at least nothing meaningful. We talked about traffic, the chill in the air, how early the snow might come. I served roasted butternut squash soup in wide white bowls, garlic knots wrapped in linen, turkey that had brined for 2 days. Nancy complimented the presentation without making eye contact. Jason filled the silence with a story about a flight delay from his last work trip. Gerald mostly grunted, sipping slowly from the glass I'd chosen for him. Smaller, sturdier, deliberate. The tension hovered but didn't strike. Not yet. I tried once, gently, to turn the conversation toward something closer to what I do. I mentioned the uptick in auction interest for early 20th century sculpture, how certain markets were shifting. Gerald waved his fork like he was swatting away a fly. "Let's not make this about money, Leah." I nodded, quiet. Swallowed the rest of my sentence and reached for the cranberry sauce. Jason chuckled. "Still doing the art thing then, huh?" His voice rose an octave, light and teasing. "Cameras and antiques, or whatever it is?" I smiled, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. Something like that. By the time we reached dessert, pumpkin tart with maple glaze, my chest was tight from all the effort, not the cooking, the restraint. That's when Gerald looked up from his plate, fork still in hand. "So," he said, casually enough to wound, "still doing the camera thing? Thought that phase would have passed by now." I stood up. Jason blinked. Nancy stopped mid-sip. The room held its breath. "I'll be right back," I said, and walked down the hall. My laptop was already on the sideboard, plugged in, ready. I'd thought I might not use it. Maybe the night would soften, maybe there'd be space for something different. But that door had never been open. When I returned, I didn't sit. I placed the laptop on the table, opened the lid, and tapped once to wake the screen. "You wanted proof I wasn't wasting my life?" I said, looking at no one and everyone. I brought it. They stared. The screen glowed in the dim light. On it, the dashboard of my company's internal portal. 7 digits in bold white. Net assets, current valuation, portfolio holdings. Gerald leaned forward slightly, squinting. Jason froze. Nancy looked at me for the first time all night. No one said a word. It wasn't pride I felt, not even satisfaction, just relief. Like finally setting down a weight I'd been carrying so long I forgot it was there. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The numbers spoke louder than I ever could. They stared at the screen like it was a language none of them spoke, blinking at the line that read $14,287,000 in crisp font. The snow had started outside, tiny flakes drifting past the window like the sky had exhaled. The fireplace crackled behind me. For a moment, it felt like we were frozen in some surreal painting. 4 people, 1 table, too much unsaid. Julia stepped into the room quietly, balancing a tray with 4 mugs of tea. She set them down without a word, only pausing to meet my eyes briefly. Her nod was almost invisible. Then she disappeared again, leaving the weight behind with the rest of us. Jason was the first to speak, though his voice didn't carry. "Is this all yours?" I tapped again, shifting the view to a second screen. documents, gallery listings, partnership contracts, real estate holdings. I own 3 galleries, 2 consultancy firms, a stake in a development group that absorbed the lender on your mortgage last spring. Gerald stiffened. What are you saying? I'm saying your mortgage, the one you've been dodging for 6 months, is through a subsidiary I co-own. I've seen every past due notice. Nancy reached for her tea, hands trembling slightly. I turned to Jason. Your Lakeview condo project? The one with the loan default warning? I saw that too. And the credit extension you applied for under a Shell LLC? Denied. His mouth parted, but no sound came out. And Mom, I said, softer, your medical bills aren't hidden. The collectors filed with state records. I saw them pile up. She closed her eyes. I've been watching all of it, I continued, waiting to see if you'd ask for help or just keep pretending I didn't exist. The silence was heavier than any accusation. I opened a folder and slid it across the table. The paper inside was warm from the fire, but the terms were cold and clear. A trust, I explained, structured, legally bound, covers all debt. Housing, medical, business, wipes the slate clean. Jason's shoulders loosened. But, I said, and the word landed like a gavel, there are conditions. Nancy looked up. Gerald scowled. Dad, I began, you retire. For real, no more crypto, no more stock tips from strangers. You stop bleeding money you don't have. He opened his mouth, jaw tightening. Jason, I turned to him, you dissolve the condo project. And you enroll in that music therapy program you once mentioned. His eyes widened. How did you talked about it once, I said. In a hallway when you didn't know I was listening, before you stopped listening altogether. He blinked rapidly. Mom, I said gently, you opened that bookstore. The one near the lake you used to draw on napkins. I already found the space. Her hand flew to her chest just briefly. And all 3 of you, I continued, we do therapy. Together, every week. Not just for optics. For truth, Gerald let out a bitter laugh. So this is a power play. No, I said, calm and still. This is the cost of ignoring someone you thought would never rise. Then I leaned forward. I won't fund denial, but I will fund healing. He opened his mouth, face flushed with something between anger and disbelief. But before he could speak, Nancy reached out and placed her hand gently over his. He stopped. Outside, the snow thickened, covering everything in white. The morning after Thanksgiving arrived gray and slow. Snow dusted the edges of the porch rail, softening the corners of the world. I stood at the door in thick socks and a sweater I hadn't worn in years, watching as they pulled away. Jason drove. Mom sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly. Dad didn't look back. They left with contracts tucked into a leather folder and expressions too complicated for words. But I saw what mattered. A porch light I never thought I'd turn on again had guided them in, and now it saw them out. Julia entered quietly, the way she always did, a tray in her hands and 2 steaming mugs balanced like art. You okay? She asked, setting one near the window. I nodded, though my eyes stayed fixed on the driveway. He said he'd come Monday. Gerald? She asked. I gave a small smile. He didn't say much, just, I'll show up Monday. It's a start. She sat beside me, crossing one leg over the other. Jason didn't hesitate. No, I said. Something in his face looked different. Softer, maybe. Less like he was performing and more like he was breathing. I walked back to my desk where the locket sat open beside a small stack of paperwork. The gold shimmered in the early light, soft and aged. Inside, Grandma Eloise's handwriting curled neatly across a folded note. Recognize worth where others saw none. That line used to feel like a challenge. Now it felt like a memory I'd grown into. Nancy had lingered the longest that morning. Before she left, she stood near the bookshelf and ran her fingers along the spine of a novel from the 1950s, the kind she used to collect in secret. I dreamed of that bookstore since 1991, she had whispered, almost as if speaking it too clearly would break the spell. Called it the Violet Finch in my head. You still can, I had replied. I already reserved the name. Now, back at my desk, the screen lit up with 3 messages in a row. Jason sent a selfie from a music therapy classroom, him holding a tambourine and grinning like a 10-year-old. Nancy's text came next, a picture of napkin sketches with different Finch logos in purple ink. And then, Gerald. Just his name, marked checked in at a clinic near Lyndale Avenue. No words, just a timestamp. It was enough. Julia sipped her coffee. You didn't have to do all this, she said quietly. I know, I replied, but you did anyway. I looked out the window again. The city was waking up, slow and muted. The world hadn't shifted, not on the outside, but something had settled inside me. Mark once told me, if you choose peace, prepare to enforce it. At the time, I thought he meant strategy. Now, I think he meant boundaries. This peace wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about choosing not to carry the weight of their doubts on my back. I picked up the locket and placed it beside my business license, both items now framed in glass. One a legacy, the other proof. The kettle hissed behind me. The snow kept falling, and for the first time in years, I felt still and seen. When I placed that locket beside my business license, I wasn't just honoring my past, I was releasing it. The silence, the doubts, the weight of being unseen. They no longer defined me. Sometimes peace doesn't come with applause or grand gestures. It arrives quietly, like a porch light flickering on after years in the dark. Families aren't healed in a moment, but in the choosing, again and again, to show up with something softer than anger, grace. If this story reminded you of a moment you stood your ground or found your own kind of home, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to share your thoughts or simply carry this with you, wherever you're headed next.